Okay, let's get started. So we're going to start on slide 46, parsing XML documents. This is part 2 of lecture 1, and then we'll continue forward with more HTML stuff. So let me find that slide. It said parsing XML documents. Actually, just to recap what we were talking about, because it's kind of weird to start in the middle of a lecture anyway. Talked about the different web browsers, different types of browsers out there. Talked about the history of web development already. Talked about HTML versus XHTML in terms of the concept, and XML as a technology, and the evolution of XHTML as it came about. Talked about the document, the DTD. We talked about validation. I think I even brought up this the W3C's validation service. Showed you how to validate pages. Talked about and started talking about basic XML, and I think I stopped kind of close here, right here actually. So, what is XML? Just to refresh your memory, it marks an element as data. It does not do anything with formatting. So you don't use XML like you use HTML to make something bold or highlighted or something. Instead, you're defining data like first name, last name. We used a lot with database applications, used a lot with banking, used a lot with invoices, automation, to send and receive data from computer to computer without any humans involved. So when we think about XML, we actually have to write our XML tags. In HTML, they're given for us. We already know what the tags are. So we have definitions within the XML to create a tag for first name, for last name as an example. Because these tags are unique and created by the developer, we need a parser. So we have to parse the tags, know what the tags are supposed to be, extract the information from it, and use the information for whatever application we're going to use it for. So parsers are kind of interesting. So the browser itself, the web browser, is an HTML parser. It doesn't parse XML code. You can look at XML code, but it's not going to allow you to do anything with it. You can't actually even see the XML code for the most part, unless you have a special browser option to show it to you. So primarily what ends up happening is people create what's called a parser. Parser takes, reads it, and it turns into the application. So web browsers are like applications, if you think of it, in terms of the concept. It's an application that opens up and parses an HTML page. It does nothing to it but show it to the reader. So an XML parser is going to open up an XML file, get all the tagged information from all of the different elements, take those data elements, copy them to variables, take the variables and do some calculation, or maybe turn them into an SQL query and update the database with it, or do something with it. So there's a lot more functionality with that. Not intended for the user, it's intended for the one computer to talk to another computer. In terms of the declaration, the document itself begins with a declaration, XML declaration, and then it specifies the version of XML being used in the document. So there's no requirement to include it at this point because we're only on 1.0. However, in the future, we might have higher versions, so it's not a bad standard to include a header that basically identifies the XML version, along with the attributes of the version and the declaration itself. So parsing XML documents. When a document adheres to the XML syntax, it's said to be well-formed, which is kind of a similar terminology that's being used with HTML files. Remember, we had transitional, we have well-formed, we have strict, we have all sorts of different ways of describing how we're going to basically measure the effectiveness or measure how good the website is, essentially. So we can use a program called a parser. It checks whether an XML document is well formed or not. We can't take an XML document, upload it to W3Cs and check it. In fact, your first assignment it might not be a bad idea to upload it to the W3Cs. If you remember that validation service I showed you last week, and then see if it's validated. You will have to do it for future assignments. You don't have to do it for the first one because it's going to fail because you're using frames. But it should fail. If it comes back perfect, you didn't follow the assignment instructions correctly. Because it's also going to tell you to move stuff out, put it in a CSS file, which you're not going to do for that assignment either. So it's got a lot of things wrong with it. Not that I'm teaching you to do things the wrong way, but you only need to know that that's kind of one of the options. that sometimes that actually helps and comes in handy. Depending upon the device you're working on, what you're creating that web page for, you might want to use frames sometimes. So, and they're still supported. So there's two different types of parsers: non-validating and validating parsers. Whether or not you're going to use a non-validating parser, it simply checks whether or not the XML document is well formed. And then we have validating parsers that check whether an XML document is well formed, and it also conforms to the associated DTD. So we have a tag definition, and so if it's in there, all the tags are defined, and it's using the proper document template, then it's going to be falling under the validated parser type that's going to check to see if it's well formed, and it also conforms to the DTD, which is kind of the same concept as the HTML checking as well. Is it going to follow through, and we have tags in there that aren't recognized? Do we have elements? Are we using correct components specifically to make it a valid or validating document? And remember, last week we talked about validation, and the main purpose of that is to make sure we're compliant or consistent. Because what happens with our document 15 years from now or something, might be used out of context on something else. In fact, that's kind of the interesting thing about the web. People steal content all the time. It's actually sort of a good thing. When they mention you, they go, oh, hey, look, ITU's got this digital arts program or something, And then they put a link to some page, and then the page opens up inside of a frame or inside of a table or something. And then the page isn't going to open up right if it's not validated correctly. If it doesn't comply to standards. If it needs something that is non-standard that's on the ITU website in order for it to look good, then it's going to look like crap when you load it up from a link. And people take and use stuff. When you put it out on the public, when you make it public, it's for everybody. It doesn't necessarily mean it's free, however. People steal content all the time. You probably want to be cautious of that as well. If you see a nice little image, and like for assignment number 1, I'm not going to take off points for plagiarism or for cheating. Well, if you steal content like a picture, I will take off. We won't get any credit at all if you turn in somebody else's assignment, but that's not where I was going with that. But the point I'm trying to make is if you work for a company and you go and you say, oh, I like this picture of the turtle, and you take the turtle and you put it on your website, but you took it from another website, you probably end up, well, not only losing your job, but probably getting sued by the company you took that image from. Not free. You're not supposed to do that. So then a lot of people say, well, let's just link to it. And then people figure out, oh, there's links to my picture of my famous turtle here. And remove it. And then, then your website's broken because the link doesn't work. So that's not an answer either. You're supposed to get permission and approval. Then there's companies that sell you icons, and they sell you images. Shutter is one of them. I think it's called Shutterfly. Very, very popular. It's like 99 cents a picture or something like that. You buy the picture, and you can use the picture after you buy the picture. It's kind of like music, actually. You're supposed to buy the music that you're listening to. And if you buy the music, then it's legal. If you don't buy the music, well, I don't know what they're doing nowadays. So when they first started enforcing that, they used to send like huge bills for like $25,000 to the parents of like 12-year-olds who were downloading illegal music, and then the parents paid for it because 12-year-old doesn't have enough money. So, all right. So well-formed documents. Going back on track here. Well-formed XML document allows user agents to read the document's data easily. In terms of XML, it's more important to have it well-formed because you don't know which parser is going to read it. And you want to make sure that the user agents, and I talked about agents in terms of concepts, there's electronic agents, there's humans. You are a human agent when you go to a website and you look at it through a web browser and you click on stuff. Well, we have non-human ones out there too. And then we have computer agents where the computer application itself is reading the XML file, parsing it, and making it work for whatever purpose it's supposed to be working for. So user agents accept XML data to be structured according to specific rules. Allows the user agent to read data quickly without having to decipher the data structure. If it's well formed, the document actually works faster in most cases. So, actually, believe it or not, it's the same case with HTML. If you have an HTML validated document, it will load faster in the web browser because the web browser doesn't have to think. It just goes, oh, okay, correct, correct, correct. If it's not, then web browsers go, oh, what do I do here? Uh-oh. Exception, what do I do here? Uh-oh. The more thinking and the slower the page is actually going to load. And what do we want on the internet? Fast loading web pages. So all XML documents must have a root element. So let's talk about the structure of an XML document. You don't have to write any XML documents in this class, but we're writing XHTML. So all this stuff applies towards XHTML as well. Because in order to be XHTML compliant, we have to be XML compliant and HTML compliant, because it's the combination of both. So although we're not writing XML documents, this stuff applies to you in terms of your rules. So the root element contains all of the other elements of the document, and when you're writing your first assignment, try to follow the standards. So you can write that first assignment without putting a HTML element in there. It'll work. In fact, as we saw last week, a lot of stuff works. So I'm not going to take off points if you have left out important elements. I probably will comment on it, but long story short, it's your opportunity to practice all the pieces, getting it to work correctly. HTML element is the root element of the HTML documents. Almost most web browsers do not require the document to include it. But XML does if you're putting HTML code in there. So that's why you need to do it. XML documents, however, require a root element that you define yourself. The root element, just to refresh your vocabulary, is this HTML. It says it's root. The reason why you want to put this in and get in the habit of putting this in is because what if you're writing PHP code along with HTML? Or JavaScript code along with HTML? Or actually, that's a little easier. You don't have to worry about that. But any other scripting language with HTML. You have HTML root, open, closing tag, and that's mixed in with other languages. How do you know it's HTML? So it's one way of identifying it and having the browser pick it up correctly. XML is case sensitive, which is interesting. Unlike HTML tags, XML tags are case sensitive. So you write XML, you cannot mix the cases of the elements. If you have an opening lowercase HTML you need for the root element, you have to have a lowercase HTML closing element. You can't go lowercase and then uppercase and back and forth. That's why I say use one case or another. So because if you start mixing and matching, your XML document's not going to work correctly. So if you use different cases for an opening and closing tag, they will be treated as completely separate tags. So resulting in a document that is not well formed if you mix and match cases. So all XML elements must have closing tags in order for it to work. So in some of your HTML you can have opening without any closing tags. Works just fine. Not in the case of XML, it requires the closing. So otherwise it comes back with an error, because HTML never gives you an error. The browser won't come back. Well, unless there's something outside. And for HTML code, it never errors out. XML code always errors out. So it's designed to organize data, not display it. So as a result, instead of documents consisting of text that contains elements, in the case of HTML, XML documents consist of elements that contain text. And so that text is being read. We don't know when the text ends if we don't close it. So that's why the closing tag is important. All elements must have closing tags, or the document will not be well formed. Here's an example of the closing tag. So nesting refers as well, and here's like opening and closing tags here, but this is as well showing you nesting. So nesting refers to how elements are placed inside of elements. And what you want to do is the reverse order. So the P in this case for the paragraph, this is a paragraph in bold and italic. P stands for paragraph, B stands for bold, I stands for italic. Opening, 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 closing, closing, closing. So you nest it in reversed order. So you close it out, so I's are together, the B's are together, and the P's are together. I see a lot of people actually out in the real world who don't pay attention to the order. If you write this in an XML document, however, and you're using this HTML code with XML, it causes problems. Even though, well, it works. Well, actually, sometimes it doesn't work. So, but you want to close them in reverse order. So an HTML document makes no difference about the elements and how they're nested. An XML document requires the tags to be closed in the opposite order in which they're opened. So what ends up happening is usually after I give this lecture and then the next one, people go, well, why do you leave it out? It doesn't really matter. Then all of a sudden you start looking at this going, well, that's why I call it sloppy HTML code. We can write sloppy HTML code. It works just fine. Like, leave out all the closing tags. It will work. Problem is, it's not compliant with XML. And so if you start and you get into the habit, and there's a lot of people out there to do that, write really sloppy HTML code, then you got to fix everything when you start using it with an XML document. Or you start looking at it and using it on a browser, it doesn't support sloppy HTML code. So, which is kind of weird, because in other areas of computer science or software engineering, you're only supposed to do it one way, and it's supposed to work one way. HTML stuff, oh, you can do it any way you want. Which, the flexibility leads to ambiguity, which leads to issues further down the road. Alright, so attribute values must appear within quoted marks. So this is what I was saying last lecture. I was putting things, attribute values in quotation marks. Well, that's XML compliance. So if you don't put them in, it'll work without the quotation marks, no problem. So in HTML, an attribute values can be placed inside quotation marks, or they can be left off. In XML, they must be placed inside the quotation marks around the values assigned to the attributes. So use quotation marks in assignment number 1. Empty elements must be closed. This is what I don't do. I don't close empty elements, which is interesting. But I don't write too much XML code, and I don't consider myself a web developer. I know the rules, but I don't follow them. So several elements in HTML do not have corresponding ending tags associated with them. The HR for horizontal rule doesn't have an ending tag, which inserts a horizontal rule, or the BR for line break doesn't. What I mean by it is that it just does something. It puts a line across or creates a line break after the end of a sentence. So empty tags must be closed if you want to do it correctly, and the elements do not require an ending tag are called empty tags. So empty elements are elements that don't require a closing tag. They're called empty elements because there's nothing inside of it. It's not like an opening B for bold, some text, and a closing B, and then you have something inside, and that's the element. Well, it's going to be empty on an HR or BR. So you cannot use them as a tag pair to enclose text or other elements. Here it is, the example. We just used the /. So you can create an empty element in an XML document by adding a single slash before the tag's closing bracket to close the element. So you're leaving out the name of the tag, you're just putting the slash in. I don't know if I have. No, I don't have. I was going to see if I had an example of it in here. No, it's just, if you've ever seen it with just the empty, just the opening and closing bracket, or just the closing bracket with the slash. We'll see that with hyperlinks, actually, because there's no ending. With an A for an anchor, there's no ending tag, so we just put the slash in. So as we come up, I have an example in the next lecture that I'm going to start today, and I'll point that out at that time. So most often you can use an empty tag for an element that does not require content, such as an image, or an anchor, actually. It's the same concept as well. So combining XML and HTML, although XML was primarily designed for data, it does not mean that you can't use it to create web pages. You can combine them together, and you can also create formatted web pages using XML and extendable style sheet language, XSL. So CSS is for HTML, extendable style sheets, XSL is for XML. If you're putting the XML inside of XHTML, got that correct. Which is a specification for formatting XML in a web browser. So, we have a formatting language for a data markup language. So it's it's going to be case-by-case specific in terms of when you're going to use that. Most likely you're going to be putting styles and formatting on HTML, not really XML, but if you're going to do it, you have to use XSL for it. So combining XML and HTML to make the transition to XML-based web pages easier, W3C's combine them together to create XHTML markup. So extendable hypertext markup language. That's where the X comes into HTML. In this class, this is what we're writing because we're following those rules that I just went through. So combining them together, it's used to author web pages almost identical. So it's identical because you're writing you're writing HTML code, but except that it uses strict XML syntax to describe the parts of the document. But we're not going to necessarily use XML. You can if you want, but we don't actually have to. That was the orientation to the course that we started last time and finished today. And it was lecture number 1. I've uploaded all of these lectures to the website already. I'm going to skip lecture number 2, and it's going to be on websites and web development. And I'm going to skip lecture number 3 for right now. I'm going to come back to it. It's going to be on Unix, I believe. I'm just checking. Yep, Unix. And what I want to start in today is lecture number 4. Lecture number 4 is going to be on the tags and on the syntax. And it has basic HTML, and it's going to help you with the first assignment. And there's a good transition between this lecture and actually writing stuff. But before I go into this lecture, I'm going to give you a little bit of information related to that file I put up on the website that was called free websites. So let's see, make this a little bit bigger. Now you're not going to read any of this stuff anyway, you're going to click on the links. So if you want to get to this, I just basically did a Google search for you. It's in HTML CSS. It's called free websites. It brings up that little file, this little file right here. And this is of September 2012. When I went through and I kind of looked at about 30 of them, 25, 30 of them, and I kind of picked these guys as, okay, these are okay. And then I decided, well, you know what, here's another one. I found this aggregate site here. This has got about another 50 on it. There's no shortage of free websites. What are you going to get with the free web? Okay, first of all, you do not need a free website for this class. You can run everything on your computer. No need to do any of this. However, a lot of people want to see their stuff live. It's, you know, satisfaction, you know, it's, I built this, if you're building a website, it's nice to see it on the web, get to it from any computer. It's fun. Alright. So all of these guys have one thing in common. Most of them have ads. So you're going to see stuff that's added to your page. If you're doing an assignment, you're going to give me the URL for the page instead of giving me the pages. No problem. Only problem is you're going to have those ads on there. Not going to affect your grade. I'm not going to take off points for ads and stuff on there. However, I would prefer to see the files, actually. This is for you to experiment with, to see it all put together. Because here's what's going to happen. You're going to have a directory, it's going to have images in it, it's going to have multiple pages in it, it's going to have frames in it. You want to see it kind of run. So, because it's more fun that way. And then you can kind of build stuff and show off your stuff. Alright. The other thing you get with these are built-in tools, which is the other reason why it's easier. If you do it with a paid website, you're going to use something like, here I have it here, FTP. You know, this is on a MacBook, so yours is probably going to be a different program. You have it's called FTP, stands for File Transport Protocol, used to transfer your files to your website. Or you're going to have to use a telnet session, and a telnet session is going to be in there to configure a database or to do something with your website. Telnet is like a remote login to the server where your website is stored. And I'm actually going to have a lecture that goes through all these technologies. I'm not going to do it now. I'm going to do it in another couple weeks after you guys get your feet wet with some HTML. But it can be more complicated to try to upload it. These free ones make it easier because it's shared, and you don't get your own URL. So you don't get, you know, www.bhacker.com. You don't get your own domain name service. You don't get anything. But you get, like, you know, freewebsites.com/my website, bhacker or something, you know. And then it's, you know, it's kind of, I like to use the word hokey, but it's free. So what are they trying to do? Well, they're trying to bring traffic to their site. The reason why it's free is because the more people you give out the link to as you're using it to host your website, you know, people are going to go and they're going to read the ads that are going to be on your website. And then, you know, it brings traffic to their server. It attracts traffic. When they don't have to do anything, they're going to have you guys do it instead. Your websites for this class probably not going to be attracting too much traffic, however. Also, if you put stuff out there, another caveat to remember is that that website, although these will probably be around for the term of the semester, probably not too much longer after that, they seem to come and go. So you put all your assignments out there and you removed them from your computer, and now they're housed out there, and then the website goes away. And then you've lost everything. So make copies of it, save your copies on your local computer. Don't rely upon that website actually existing more than a couple months or so. Plus also what ends up happening is they have a tendency to, oh, I'm sorry, we reformatted the server. And then all your stuff is gone. It's not reliable. Some of them might claim, you know, differences with the amount of space. You know, this one's got 3 gigs, this one's got 1 gig. All the space you need for this course will fit on a thumb drive. I mean, actually, it fit on like maybe, you know, you're going to take up less than a gigabyte. In fact, I would be surprised if you took up that much. It's probably going to be like 500 megabytes, which these guys are going to give you in excess of a megabyte. So your space requirement's not going to matter either. Your tools aren't going to really matter. They have to give you some way of getting it there. A lot of these are going to be web interface tools, which makes it a little bit easier because you just go to their website, follow their instructions, and upload all your files. Because they have to add stuff to your files, so you know, like those ads. So they're going to have you do it that way. And you don't have as very much control over it as you did if you have your own website. So if you're interested, these are the ones I promised I would give to you. It's just a hand pick. It's probably not the best ones, and don't take these as recommendations. This one down here on the bottom, freewebpages.org, better resource actually. So maybe you like one domain name better than another, you know, or something. It's your choice in terms of what you want to do. Alright, let's go back to some HTML stuff, unless we have questions on those free websites. Nope. And this one here, by the way, if you're following along, is lecture number 4, because I've skipped 2 and 3 for right now. We will go back to 2 and 3. And the cool part about this lecture is you can cut and paste, put all these examples in text files and see it work, which is really cool too. And so I might actually end up doing some of that, depending upon you know, how good the explanations of some of this stuff is. So there's a little bit of review in the beginning. I'm going to kind of skip through because we just talked about this stuff in terms of what the concept is. We know we're writing HTML code, language for static, which is actually kind of an interesting point. I probably should make up. I'll go over this. Static versus dynamic. HTML is strictly static. What do you mean by static? Well, it doesn't move, doesn't do anything. No animations, no behavior, no events occur on an HTML page. And you're really sitting here going, well, yeah, they do. When I go to those HTML pages, a lot of stuff happens. Well, you have to mix HTML scripting languages in order for that to work. We're going to look at JavaScript in this class. Actually, I believe that even as far as assignment number 2 or 3, you'll be using JavaScript. The primary focus is on the design of the HTML code. And I'm going to give you most of the script. It's not a programming course. You don't have to write JavaScript, well, you know, extensive stuff. But you need to know how to put it into a script. Excuse me, put it into a document. So given a JavaScript function or given some information, how do you put it into a document to format the document to have it run correctly, which is the focus, essentially. Or to move text from one box to another box, and to move things around. That's what's called dynamic behavior. So hypertext links refer to the fact that pages are more than just text. So they can you can also load multimedia, providing links for jumping within. Multimedia, and also provide links for jumping within and without of a page. Most of the help files these days, it's all in one file, and it has a little menu, like a little outline. You click on the outline items, and it brings you lower. We'll look at how to do that as well. Actually, probably today, or maybe next time. And you flip around using anchors inside of the document. So that's pretty much all the navigation that you get. In order for functionality to occur, that's where the scripting comes in. So the markup refers to the fact that you're working with augmented text with special tags to identify the structure and the content. So we have web development tools, and we know we're going to use HTML. We're going to write our own HTML course in this course. Anyone who sends me a Dreamweaver or one of those GUI plug-in Pray, or, you know, I had one student a couple of terms ago, because, you know, Microsoft Word you can save as HTML. They wrote it in Microsoft Word, and then they saved it as HTML, and they submitted it as an assignment. What? None of that stuff gets you any credit. So use a text editor we talked about before. So assembly language versus high-level language. Well, those GUI, what you see is what you get kind of text website editors is a high-level interpretation of what we're trying to accomplish in this course. So we don't want to use like Hot Dog or Dreamweaver or Macromedia or anything like that. Don't use those tools. Use text editor. So why are we learning it this way? Many may want low-level control. How you're going to if you use a Dreamweaver or something like that, how do you know the low-level information? How do you know, what to change or to fix something? You can't troubleshoot anything that way if you don't have the knowledge of it. Size, readability of the page. Those pages are huge. The pages that you're going to create are going to be really small. Nice, manageable. And you may want dynamic features such as scripts or applets or something to run in it. So we have the tag versus the element, as we've seen so far. This is kind of a review a little bit, but so the HTML specifies a set of tags that identifies the structure of the content. So the tags, this is what was referred to as the tag. Actually, notation is those opening and closing. There's our closing tag. This is the empty element closing tag I was talking about. You don't have to put in the forward. There's nothing to enclose, so you don't need this arrow here. If you follow my mouse here, all you need is the second one. That's the example of the closing tag. So I see a lot of people leave that out, actually. In fact, if you leave it out, what is going to end up happening is your image is probably not going to load correctly. So here's an image with a source, and we're using quotation marks that specifies an image. Most tags will come in pairs, the title, the opening, closing. HTML elements are enclosed in pairs, so we have title, my home page. So the title element, and this is just the vocabulary. And here's the bold element in between the tags. So what happens between the tags is called the element. The tags are the tags. This is the opening, this is the closing. Here's the paragraph tag. So P, so is a paragraph element that contains a bold element inside of it, because we've nested it inside. So it's a collection of elements, text, media, with content that we're going to use. Alright, so here, and okay, so here's where we're going through. The links here are not going to work. Instead, what you're going to do is cut and paste this. Everything inside of the boxes can be cut and pasted and put inside of a text file, and then you double click on the text file and you can open it up in your web browser. So they're kind of small. Well, actually, they're not too small. But this is going to be the format of this lecture. So what I'm going to do is show you the elements, and then we're going to go through what each one of them is doing. Basic concept here. So in HTML, this is basically showing us our structural elements. And we have three sets. We have the HTML, opening and closing. We have the head, and then we have the body in terms of our set. Now, the color coding here is to try to help you kind of figure out the differences between the different levels. It is a hierarchy, by the way. The body comes after the head, and all this stuff comes in between HTML. So head contains the information for the browser, the browser window, style definitions. Your CSS will go in the header section. JavaScript code will go in the header section. The body contains the actual content of the page. We can see comments. These are comments right here. You may put comments in your code. In fact, it's a good idea to put comments in your document. And this is the format for it. I don't know why they picked so many characters to put in here, but it's the exclamation point with the 2 dashes, closing, but there's no exclamation point on the closing comment. So comments appear between these particular notations. So here's our text layout. So the body that contains multiple lines of text. So the text layout is pretty much ignored, as we saw before. In fact, that we've already gotten this far with some examples already. So no spaces are identified, so it doesn't really matter where you can put all this on one line, and that's okay, except for when you're reading the HTML document, it might be a little bit hard to see it if it's all on one line. Sometimes you'll see it all on one line if you take a document that was on a Unix server and you open it up on a Windows system, because of the line returns aren't identified correctly. There's 2 different symbols that are being used on the different platforms. So your local system might actually end up not showing it correctly. So the body can contain multiple lines of text. So here's our text layout. It's spaces. It's pretty much ignored. Every sequence of the white space is a single space. And this is the other thing people don't like. So they go, okay, so I'm going to put 5 spaces in. 5 spaces is 1 space. 20 spaces is 1 space. 15 spaces is 1 space. Everything's 1 space. So you actually have to use an ASCII character sequence to put in a space, non-breaking space, and NSB, I think, you put that little, and it's an ASCII code. What does that mean? Well, it's a character because this is ASCII characters, by the way. We can put the character in, and the character, like say for example T, for this, equates to a code that's interpreted for its definition. So we go backwards. If we want one that doesn't show anything, we put a character for a non-breaking space in there, and it gives us, well, it shows us a non-breaking space. If we put a space in there, it puts 1 space in there. So it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. That's the first thing you're going to probably pick up is that non-breaking space ASCII character code. So let's see, the layout here is going to look interesting when you run it because it's all going to be on 1 line instead of on multiple lines. So overriding default layouts. So we have the head, and this is actually really bad, and I put this in as an example because we have mixed and matched cases, but do we have head? We don't have head. We don't have a head closing, so we just have, we do have a head closing. We have an head opening and a head closing, but this is caps and this is lowercase. So this is an example of poor, sloppy code. Not XML compliant. HTML compliant, works just fine, but not XML compliant. So the layout of the text must be left to the browser. Why is that? So when you override and you put tags, let me rephrase that. When you put tags in your document, you're overriding the browser. If you go into your browser settings, the browser is going to have, the fonts, the background color, the indentation. You can actually set everything you set on a page through the browser settings. And if you do that, in the page you're overriding the browser. If you don't put it in the page, it uses the default browser settings, whatever those happen to be. You want to keep as much to the browser functionality as possible because then you make yourself more cross-platform and more browser compatible. If the browser is the one doing the interpretation and not you, it's going to know about all the fonts that it has available to it. If you put a special font type characteristic in a browser, in the document, and you load the document in a browser that doesn't identify that, it's going to get confused. It's going to use whatever, and it's not going to look the same. Long story short, don't go overboard with your tags. Let the browser, don't override, let the browser determine how it wants to show it. Because mobile browsers are going to show a little bit differently than desktop browsers. So you can override some of the text layout. So you can cause a line break using a BR tag, no closing tags. Can specify a new paragraph starting with a new line, proceeding by a blank line. Can force, this is our NBSP. Can force a space character using a symbol for a non-breaking space. This is last slide when I was talking about that. This is the character here. And you see it has this little ampersand in front of it. It's an escape. It's called an escape character. This is an escape sequence, and it's giving us an ASCII character, which is that space. So in here, we're using it in here. So this is another paragraph with a space and a gap space. This is only 1 space, by the way. So this is really not accomplishing anything. Well, we're going to get 2 spaces because I see some extra spaces in here. So we'll end up with 2 spaces out of that because we'll get 1 by the browser and then 1 by that non-breaking space. But this is called overriding. So you're overriding the look and the feel of the page because the browser is not able to, you're basically not having the browser do it. So you can separating blocks of text. In this particular case, what we're looking at is the header. So you can specify headers or headings for paragraphs or blocks. So here's where the H1s, the H2s, the H3s, the H4s come into play. So tags produce a large, bold heading. So H stands for header. and we have different sizes. So we have slightly smaller one is the 2, the 3. The bigger the number, the smaller the header, which is kind of not very intuitive. You'd think H1 would be the biggest. Well, it would be the smallest. And then you go bigger, bigger, bigger. Because you know when you say font size 1, font size 2, font size 3, you get bigger, bigger. Opposite. So H6 is smaller than H1. Which, okay. So H6 tag, it produces the tiniest header, and we only have 6 levels. So you don't go any higher than the H6. You can insert a horizontal rule to divide the sections out as well with a HR. In fact, this is the proper syntax for it, instead of just putting in HR without the closing. So what we have here is an opening and a closing that is together, versus an opening and a closing this way, because we're going to have, this is not an empty element. This one is an empty element. And then we see, well, what do we have in between, which is kind of interesting. We have the attributes, or excuse me, the properties and the attributes that are associated with it. And one of the properties for horizontal rule is going to be the width of the line. And here we're going to have it, put it at 50%. So here's size is equal to 10, set the thickness, set the width. This is 50% of the page, so it doesn't go all the way across end to end. It only goes halfway across. And then if we center it, it's going to be right in the middle, which is actually kind of cool. So unfortunately, this is how you do the tags manually. Well, you have to do them this way anyway, even if you're going to use a CSS with it, to kind of set certain formats for the structure of the page itself. Then we have text alignment, which is kind of interesting. And so, and then we have our first style indication here. So you can specify the element, and it should be aligned. Default is the left justified. So if you don't specify anything at all, everything is going to be left justified. Kind of like how you get in like a word processor. It's only going to be on the left. Utilize the style attribute of the tag here. So H1, and we have style is going to be equal to text.alignment, which is a property, center, which is going to say, instead of using an equals, in fact, if you look at the previous tag here, without using a style, we just set a property with an attribute on an existing tag HR, horizontal rule. We said width is equal to something, size is equal to something. The most common mistake is we get text alignment is equal to center. Not the same format, different format. So, and we have style. So it's the style that's going to be equal to. So this is really the property, and then it's going to be equal to the attributes that's associated with the property, and the attribute's going to looks like another property attribute combo, which it actually is. It's a subcomponent. So then we have text alignment center. Then we have a centered header instead of a regular one. And then over here we can go P, paragraph style is equal to. These are what's called inline styles. Not a style sheet, not what I would call a consistent good way of doing this, but this overrides anything else. Whatever you put in the document itself is going to override anything else that applies to the document. So automatically we're overriding the browser. If in the head section, if in this document itself we decided to use an external style sheet, this would override the external style sheet as well. The closest to the customer, the more effective. Further away you get in terms of the hierarchy, it all gets overridden. So you can destroy a really good style sheet by putting styles inside of a document, long story short, because it's going to override everything. And the problem with this is, like, for example, we change this paragraph over here. It doesn't change all the paragraphs, just change this paragraph. So then we have inconsistencies within the document. It's kind of like when they tell you all those best rules of, keep all the same font size, keep all the same font type, all the same amount of indentation, and then you start messing it around, and then you got one thing that looks weird. But maybe you want to make it look weird on a purpose. There's a reason why you want to make it look weird. So use the style attribute of the tag. So to justify more than one element as a group, use the div tags. Div for division or divide. It's for the sections of the document to say that this particular section is going to have this attribute to it. And do I have a div in here? Here's the div right here. So used to basically create the dividing point and close all of these different elements inside of it. So then we have div with the style is going to be equal to this text slash alignment to the right. So all this stuff's going to be aligned to the right. And then we close the div tag. So we don't have to put this on each one of the lines. Although I've seen it done that way, which is kind of weird. And it'll be like, okay, each one to the right, to the right, to the right, to the right, to the right. Just put in a div tag and you only have to do it once. That's basically the concept with that. Div tags are used extensively these days because you're going to apply them to style sheets, and you can say this section is a quote. This section, and then you put a name on the section, and then you put attributes associated with the name, and then you have full consistency among everything. All those things that are inside of the div are all formatted the same way. Makes it easier, because what you want to do is kind of make it easy for yourself, which is why CSS is kind of really good for this. CSS does the same thing as HTML tags, by the way. The only thing different is it's all formatted correctly together instead of individually throughout the document. This is what I consider kind of sloppy HTML, because it's all within the text of the document, which is kind of risky. So text styles. So you can specify styles for fonts, but you have to know these styles in order to be able to do anything with it in terms of a CSS. We have bold, we have italics, we have underline, which is kind of intuitive. TT, typewriter type. So nobody uses TT anymore. If you're writing a source code example, you can use TT. Makes a nice little, illustrative kind of. Here's a line of code. And then use a typewriter. Typewriter so it's fixed with font, gives you a nice effect. Big increases the size of the font, make it big. Well, how big is big? Well, we can change the style, make big something small if we wanted to. So, small decreases the size of the font. Well, by what? So, big and small are defined by the browser, by the way. So when you put a style in, you're going to change the style of the browser to actually change that. So if elements are nested, the order of the opening and closing is important. It must be last in, first out, as we saw before. So this is another point that was iterated. So here we have inside of the code the big, and if you want to see what this looks like, cut and paste it, put it in a text file. You'll see it. So here's some more styles. Subscript, superscript. I hardly see anyone using these, which is kind of weird. Well, you see them nowadays. On the 12th, and the TH has got to be super. Or, you're writing something that says, quoted by such and such in 1995, and this is reference number 1, sub. So it does come in handy for different types of papers. P, whoops, we want to go here. The P is going to be the style is going to be color, red for the paragraphs. We're going to change the color to red. Span. Span, the style, which is going to be another section. So this isn't for inline text. We're going to say that it's going to span. Style color is going to be red. And then we're going to have the subscripts. And then we're going to put in an X as a subscript with 1. And then we're going to put in another one. We're going to change the color to blue. And so between the opening and the closing span, the attribute is going to apply to blue text, to red text. And then on the bottom here, we have another sub in here. So for inline text, we can apply just kind of like div, but div's a section. Span is just the text that's in there. So you can nest all of these guys together, by the way. So pre, P-R-E, another one is not used so much. That says make it into really plain text. Don't use HTML for this. So pre specify the text that is to be displayed as is. Line breaks, spaces are preserved. It looks exactly the way it's supposed to look. Like it will look like this on the screen. Don't put this on the top of your page. Put in your document and then put it on the bottom. Well, not only will your inner tags won't work, because you can't nest inside a pre, but you're defeating the purpose of this class, because you're just not using tags. So it's useful for code or whatever you want to fit any specific layout. So we have the block quote. So block quotes specify text that is to be indented by both margins. So it indents on both sides. It's just another style we can apply towards the text. Just for quotations, for indentations, and for subsections. And here's our block quote down here. No pre over here. This does come in handy because you don't want to necessarily format that by hand. Okay, so now we got our lists. And believe it or not, this lecture is going to cover everything you need to do for that first assignment. So this is lecture number 4. Everything you're doing is in this lecture. FYI. So there's 3 different types of lists. We have ordered list, unordered list, and definitions lists. I mean, as people get familiar with the ordered and the unordered, the definition is kind of interesting. You may not be familiar, who knows. So we can actually change the order property to change the attributes to numbers. Excuse me, to the orders to numbers, to characters, to letters, to Roman numerals. The unordered is bullets. And we can change the bullet type to circles, to squares, to anything that we want, essentially, in terms of its typing. So specifies the order. So li, list item, is going to be used in both cases. So whether we have an unordered or an ordered, we start out with that type of list, and then when the list I is list item. There's no closing tag, and there's no, and it's not an empty tag, but there's no closing tag. It's just going to be list item, list item, list item, list item. So it specifies the order. You can set it for ordering starting at an index as well. So start the order at 5. Start the order at 6. Use numbers. Use characters. And then unordered list specifies it with a bullet. So the list item itself identifies each item. And then the DL for definition list. So it identifies each item with a DT, which is kind of different because now we're getting into tables. Well, table syntax, sort of. You know, it's like going to be the DT and the DD, the definition, and then the line. So it's going to say HTML, and then HTML this is going to indent it, actually. So actually, this is slide number 13. Oops. This is what you're probably going to want to do when you write these, when you start thinking, oh, how in the world is this tag supposed to work? Well, then you do this to figure out how this tag is supposed to work. This is an example of how you're going to, practice and learn from the lecture. And I'm going to call this example. Put it on the desktop. We're doing this to show you what the definition list looks like. Because actually I see a lot of people like using bullets and then they'll try to put a bunch of spaces in here. Because you can accomplish this in a couple different ways. The definition is going to have, this is the item and this is the definition. This is the item, this is the definition. That's what it's going to look like. And here's our first, second, and our third item with our ordered list. We don't have an unordered list in here. We can easily put one in now. Actually, in order to easily put one in, we just can change it. So we can go like this. And change the O to a U. Now we have bullets in here automatically. So I changed the O to a U. So instead of OL for ordered list, I changed it to unordered list, UL. So now I have bullets in here. This is what you're doing for the assignment, by the way. You're just going to come up with your own stuff. Alright, so let's see. Oops, went too far. 14, yes. I know, I clicked too far ahead. Here we go. 12, 13, 14. Oh, 13. Okay, so those are the different list types. Hyperlinks, used probably the most often, actually. Because you're not going to put hyperlinks in a style sheet. You're not going to, you know, it's going to be done inside of in the document itself. So perhaps the most important element is called the hyperlink. It's also referred to as an anchor, or you also have this little A here. A's are kind of interesting because the A stands for anchor, and you can anchor anything. You can anchor pictures, links. You can make a hyperlink that has a picture in it. You can put a hyperlink that has text in it, that's empty, that's maybe the entire page is a link. So the reference is going to be the URL. So hyperlink reference is what that stands for. And then we have the closing anchor. So where the URL is at, this is going to be an address. It can be a local address. If you leave off the path, it'll be a local address. So usually when it's a path, we usually put in, myimage.img. And what it's going to do is it's going to download my image. When you click on it, it's going to give you that image. Or you could possibly go to a website. So if the page is associated with over a web, it'll have the HTTP protocol on it. If you leave off the HTTP, you're going to have a problem. So the first thing usually people do when they put hyperlinks together is they'll go www, and it'll come back and say nothing happens when I click on this link. Well, you have to put the HTTP in there. You can also put the word file in there, file colon, if you're loading a local file instead of an HTTP page. This direction here is going to tell us the colon and the / is going to have us navigate to versus download versus, I mean, it's basically going to be our directional kind of information. So if not, the browser will assume that it's the name of a local file. If you leave it out and you go target is equal to blank, it causes the page to load in a new window. So here we have another attribute, target equals _ blank. Otherwise, the target's going to load, and the target is where you're going. It's going to load in the same page. So usually people want to know, well, how in the world do I load it in a different page? Well, then use the _ blank. So here's our example up here where we have, again, it's going to be Cal State Hayward. So that's okay. And then here's a local page here. Because we didn't put a URL in there, it's just going to go opening up this particular HTML page. Target is going to be blank, which means it's going to open up a new page, a new window. So this is not a pop-up window. This is a new browser window, actually, which makes it easier for navigation. On a mobile device, we're probably not going to notice it because it's going to replace the current window with the new window. Well, what's the difference between that and just changing the contents of the new window? So it really only applies towards desktop kind of. If you had a form, a registration form or something, and you wanted it to open up, the new window would open up on top of, overlaid on the original window, and you'd be able to go back and forth between the two. On some applications, like mobile device applications, you're defeating the purpose, so it doesn't really matter. So for long documents, you can even have links to other locations in the document. So remember I was saying before, we can have like a menu on the top and outlined. For most help documents are done this way, actually. And so the syntax of the hyperlink is using that, a tag element. Excuse me, they put the element inside it. We have an opening and closing A. So over here we have, again, an opening and a closing A. But the tag, the reference, is going to be a point within the document. And we're creating the anchor by giving it a name. So here's a classic way of creating a help document where the document is just huge. It's just like 50 pages long, but it's all one document. And you don't have to scroll all the way through it. You want to quickly click to where you want to go. So you create in here an A name is equal to indent, where indent is a variable for identifying this particular location. So down here we have A's name is equal to HTML name is equal to HTTP, name is equal to IP, name is equal to TCP, as an example, which is basic anchor points in the definitional list. And this is sort of like a help menu. And then we have the H reference where we have this hash sign here, which is the number sign, hash sign, indent. So when we'll jump to that location within the file. So this hash sign says it's within the file. It's local within the file. So versus outside of the file. If I left this out and just put an indent, it's going to look for indent, whatever indent might happen to be, inside of the local directory outside of the file. So the hash is telling me inside of the file. And then here the URL hash is going to say, okay, find another file out there and then go inside of the file to indent, which is kind of interesting. So you can do this with a first assignment actually, because you're going to have a list of menu items in one frame, open up another document in another frame and go to another particular spot in that document in the next frame over. And I'll talk about frames and tables and stuff soon. And so it jumps from the middle to another document just as easily. So these here are going to jump to these locations down here, giving us the hash sign here because it's inside of the documents. And then we're also able to put the text of the element. This is a regular little anchor, creates links just like regular little links. If you cut and paste it, put it into a text file and run it, you'll see what it does actually. Not too bad. Images. So you can include an image tag using img for image. Most people are familiar with this as well. By default, browsers can display GIF and JPEG files. Browsers are getting more supportive, but you still can't put a BMP in most browsers. You want to stick with the GIFs and the JPEGs. Most compatible with most browsers in terms of your image format. So there's a PNG is also supported these days as well. But PNG wasn't so popular back when this lecture set was created. So it is now, though. So you can put a PNG in there. Other image formats may require plugins for applications to support them. Movie files, MP3 files. No problem. You install the plugin for the browser, and voila, it works just fine. And you tell it to open it with the plugin, and that's how you get it to work. So here we have an image source is going to be equal to some file name. Alternative. Well, which means if the image doesn't load, put this text in here. Usually you see the alternative text saying, company logo missing, or, user's picture missing, or something, It tells you that if you see that text on the screen, you couldn't find the image. So again, if the file is associated over the web, you must start with the HTTP protocol here. And if not, it will assume a local file, and in here we have our div style center image here, where the borders are going to be equal to 0, which means don't put a border around it. So the images are kind of cool because you can put a subtitle on an image, you can have a border, you can have a background, you can have all sorts of different attributes, properties and attributes associated with the image itself. The width, the height can also be set. You can set one or the other or both. You don't have to set all the properties. Or you can just simply say image and set it that way. Tables. By far the most popular. Outside of divs, tables are going to come in handy. Tables are how you're going to get in fact, you can create your entire website inside of a table. Not a bad idea. Because then you have things proportionally aligned correctly. Instead of someone making the browser real small and having things word wrap all over the place and your columns aren't going to look good, your table is going to guarantee you that your format's going to look consistent, which is why a lot of people use those. They're going to use it outside of a frame. Table is the replacement, essentially, or the divs are replacement. So anyway, tables are common tools for arranging complex layouts on web pages. A table divides content into rows and columns. By default, 8 column entries are left justified, so you can provide some alignment. So provide for alignment. So here we have the title, and then inside of the body we have a table. So the table starts with an open and closing table tag, as you might guess. The TR stands for table row, and then we have TD for table data that shows up inside of the table row. So we define the rows, and then we define the data inside of the rows, or the columns. So specify a row in a table, so you can actually nest them inside as well, inside of the same table. So it's very flexible. Although it can get kind of confusing, especially if you don't label anything with any comments. You don't know where the outer table and the inner table and the inner table, what they're supposed to be. So table data specifies the data, each column or entry in the table. You don't have to have the same number of data elements per each row, and you can have one data element span multiple rows if you want, using a span actually. So the layout of the table, you can have the border of the table using a border attribute. So table border is equal to 1. It's going to put a line around the table. And these examples actually aren't bad to cut and paste and put into text files. Take a look at it. So increases the number, makes the border thicker, so 2, 3. You can control the horizontal and the vertical layouts within the cells. So table date alignment, center, right, top, down, by changing the alignment, the vertical alignment. You can also apply the layout to the entire row, so table row. So noticing that this is table data, this is table row. All of the property and the attribute sets work with all of the things, and actually you can put it on the table too. It all intermixes, which is kind of cool. Makes it complicated though for some people, but you know, it's only complicated when you look at it and you go, why did you do it that way? And then you see they're applying it to each one of the table there. Just do it on the whole row. Make the whole row left align. So it's kind of like how if you start nesting it too much and you start applying it, the attributes too far deep in the hierarchy, it can actually make it more confusing, more trouble than it's worth. So here's our table width, and we have the width is going to be equal to 100%, which means it's going to take up the whole page. So by default, the table is sized to fit the data. So you can override the specific and specify the width of the table relative to the page. And here we have 60%. 20. That's hard to do without testing, because you're going to look at that and go, well, do I want it 40%, 60%? You know, because then you're putting it into relationship, and you're using a percentage because it's in relationship to the other elements that are on the screen or on the page. So sometimes, you know, it's easier to do it that way versus like inches or like pixels or something. Useful for page footer. So set the table width to 100%. The first column is left justified, the second column is right justified, and then you have a nice little page footer at the bottom of the page. And you can put a table down there, and then all of a sudden all your pages are applied with the same footer, and then it looks consistent. Nice. So tables are sometimes used for consistency in terms of that concept. So you can control the space between the cells and the margins within the space within the cells. So here we have the table with a cell space is equal to 5. Excuse me, cell spacing and cell padding. So how much extra space is going to be in there, and how much padding are we going to put essentially? So here we have a border is 1, a cell spacing is equal to 4, cell padding is equal to 8. So we're aligning out the margins, and we're aligning out the space. And we can also add a heading. So you can cut the TH for table header, heading, which you don't actually have to do. You can shift it, mimic it, but the header is going to be in bold, and it's going to be a larger font. The only thing different is actually the size of the header row is a little bit wider as well. In terms, it's set by default by the font actually. So it's basically to display the header in the center bold, and it will be centered. You can actually change and override the TH. Just change the alignment to left align or right align. So you can also you can have data that spans more than one column. This is where the column span is equal to 2, which means this data is going to take up 2 columns instead of 1 column. So you can have some interesting stuff. Similarly, you can span more than one row. So we can have a TD table row. In fact, this is slide number 20. Not a bad idea to kind of take a look at it. Just takes 2 seconds because I already have the document out here. There it is. So that's kind of an interesting effect where we have the 5 that's spanning 2 columns. And we have this one here that's going up this way, 2 columns. So kind of hard to see that though when you're looking at the code, because the code is and then we have 3 headers on here, header 1, 2, and 3, and then when we look at the code, we go, which one is this, number 20? Don't worry, we only have half hour left. I can also check my time when I'm going to exit out. So let's see. So up here we can see where we have table header 1, 2, and 3, which is going to give us, and then we're going to have the table. The border was set to 1, which is how we saw the. I just can't go back to it. So the border around the table, and then we have 1, 2, and 3 in terms of the rows, and we've changed the column span and the row span. So the column span is going to be the number of columns this way, and then the row is going to be this way. So kind of interesting because you could put like a picture in one, and then take the borders away. And then it's a nice little formatting that's going to always look the same regardless of how big the screen is. So comes in handy for a lot of stuff. Lo and behold, the frame. Most people have never heard of frames because we don't use them that often, but you have to use one in the first homework assignment. Frames provide the ability to split the screen into independent pages. Must define a frame set that specifies the layout of the frames. Actual pages to be displayed must be in separate files. So this is what you're doing for that first assignment. It's worth the effort. It's worth the assignment. So you can divide it out vertically. And let's see. I don't have any of these pages, so I'm going to get error messages. But I'm actually going to see if it actually works with Firefox. It should. It should work. Although it's nobody likes the concept anymore, nobody uses it anymore, it's still supposed to be supported. So let's see. I'm going to find out. So we don't have. Okay, so this is going to divide the page out into 2 separate frames. The frame set is going to have well, we're going to put in page 1 and page 2 in each one of the different frames, and there's going to be 2 frames on this page. What do I mean by frame? Let's see if this works. Here's the frames. This one is separately controlled than this one. Imagine this as being 2 separate web windows, 2 separate browser windows. And so this is a lot different. We can move the frames actually. And we can scroll the frames. I didn't put this, oh, yeah, there we go. We can scroll the 2 frames too. Whoops. I'm sorry? It should. Actually, the only other browser I've got on here is going to be Safari. Let's see. It should open up in Safari. There it is. Yep. Well, it's not going to show me the lovely error messages. It's going to be a little bit different. What else do I have in here? I have Chrome on here too. It should work. It's still supported. Here's what the problem is though. So I have scrollable frame here. What if I wanted to print this sucker out? I can only print out 1 frame at a time. I can't get this whole thing to print out. Well, if I print it out, it's going to look like this. If it would actually print out correctly. And then I can't get this to scroll correctly along with this one. It's 2 independent sections. It's like 2 sections of the web page that aren't part of the web page. So what you're going to do for the first assignment is create one of these suckers. Load a page over here that's going to have a menu. When you click on the menu items, it's going to load something over here. This is really the only thing that is really useful for these days. Because when we print, we only print this out. We never print this out. We can also put the frame, well, I've also seen it quite successfully done with the frame on the top. And then the top has all the company logo, the images, the menu items, and everything. And when you click on the menu items, it loads in the bottom. And then when you go to print or something, you're printing out the bottom. And you click on the bottom, and it gets rid of the frame. And it actually expands out the page into a new window, loads it in the window. It creates a nice kind of an effect in terms of navigation. For navigation, okay, but you can still do all of that stuff without a frame. You don't need frame sets for that. So frame sets, when you mention that, you go, oh, no, I don't use a frame set. And I don't want you leaving this class thinking that you should do bad practice these days. Besides, also, if you had this and I was putting this on a mobile phone or something, and my phone was like maybe this big, it takes my real estate away. I can't navigate like the whole thing left to right, top to down. It's all divided out. So if, the exact opposite is true. However, if I have like this really huge screen, nice, because then I can navigate to different parts, and I have more real estate to look at, basically. So it does have a place. Not so common though these days. All right, number 21. Let's see. Oops. What is going on here? Auto recovery. Okay. So I wanted you to see what it looked like because I know some of you have never seen that before. Because you're not going to run into a website that's going to have that right now. Because everyone would say, no, no, don't use frames. So no one's going to use frames anymore. Alright, so you can divide vertically, you can divide horizontally. We have frame defaults. So this is what we saw in the example here where you were using a default up here. This asterisk, comma, asterisk. And we were loading the frame source is equal to page 1, page 2. You can do this, actually, if you want to. You can change the percentage. This was a 50-50 because we didn't mention it at all. We can change it so when it, with the left-hand side or the right has got, has a, 5 spaces or something, or it's like 10% of the screen is on the left and 10% is on the right. So by default, each frame is independent page, scrollable. The relative size of the frame can be changed by dragging the border, as we saw. Here's one that has a 35% on one side. This is what those asterisks were for. What percentage? If you just leave it as an asterisk, it's going to divide it 50-50. Here we have 35% on one side, which I'm going to make a little smaller, and then the remaining is going to be on the other side. So, and then we're going to basically create a frame border. Well, we didn't have a frame border on the other one, so this one says 0. We can leave it out. Frame set columns. We can put columns in. We can put frames inside of frames. And in the old days, people got so carried away with this frames inside of frames inside. It can make the page difficult to navigate from a page perspective. You can specify whether or not you want a border with the 1 or the 0 for on or off, and you can even nest the frames. Here's our frame controversy. So, probably the most controversial feature of HTML. Some people love them, some people hate them. Two uses for frames as a navigational aid, as I mentioned before, to navigate, can divide the screen into static menu frames that never go away and the main page for navigation of the site, or as a means of separating program input from output. I still see it being used for that. In fact, if you go into some of the, there's a couple of W3 schools uses frames. They have it so you can write your code in one window and run it in another. And it's two separate web pages going on there, two separate frames. Excellent for that. There's also a couple of websites out there that do compilation, translation, file uploading. You can upload it in one frame and look at it in the other frame, the results. So when you want to have something compile, when you want to test something, and you want to actually have it loaded fresh into a separate browser window without actually having to open up a browser window, and you want it all on the same page, then you frame set it. So you can basically navigate with two separate sites, essentially located, or two separate pages that are being independently controlled, which is nice. Dividing out the screen into static main input form, maybe for the frame, and then a frame for the displaying the output. In primitive shopping cart stuff used to do that, not anymore. It's all integrated, but it's usually just computer science stuff. If you go to W3 schools, stuff like that, you'll see frames being used. I don't think ITU has a frame at all being used. Well, they're using WordPress. They're not even doing it in HTML. It's all WordPress. Do you have a question back there? You're not going to put the frame in a style sheet. You can put the divs in the document and then define them in the style sheet. You can use them together, yes, if that was your question. You can use them together. Oh, you can use it all together. All the frame's going to do is essentially divide out that window and make it so you can look two separate. You can actually have, okay, so remember, Chrome originally had that, 4 different windows. If you have a really big screen, that's great, actually. In fact, you can create your own website that loads in. In fact, it's just one HTML page you load up, and you can get that Chrome effect on any browser. Because you can have 4, 6, 8 separate browser windows all opened up in the same screen, under the same. It's nested. Basically, you're nesting browser windows inside of the window. And it's nice, because then you can like flip around, make one bigger, you know. Actually, you can put like a little button in there, just, okay, make it bigger, you know, bring to focus. And you can have like 5 websites running simultaneously, all in the same window. Nice if you have a really huge monitor. If you have a small little monitor, you have a phone, not so good. It makes it unreadable, essentially. So, it basically has a special purpose to it. You're not going to put a frame set, you're not going to use frames on every one of your documents. In fact, I'd highly recommend not doing it, because you can't print, it makes the real estate hard to adjust the site. It just complicates things. But it does come in handy, though. Here's a menu frame, and the reason why it does come in handy, here's a menu frame. And this is kind of an outdated way of doing menus as well. So I'm going to have probably next week actually, talk about menus, site maps. Fortunately for you, I'm not really huge into wireframing and site maps, but if you're a web developer, that's one of the things you have to do is kind of map out how the navigation is going to work on the site, what the pages are going to look like, what your menuing system is going to look like. You take a design course, then you'll look at storyboards and site maps and stuff. And concept being, you want to have some universal presence, which is why frames actually make sense. A frame is going to always be on the screen, never going away. So the menu never goes away. So now what they do is they copy the menu and they put it into a separate file, and then they take and they load it in a div tag. So you have the menu on the top, the menu on the left, the menu on the bottom. Actually, now you get the header, the footer, and the header's got the menu in it, the footer, the left, the right, all in divs. All on each page has the same div tags on them. So it's a little bit of repeat, a little repetition. But you, as the student in the back was pointing out, you can put all that div information into a style sheet, load the style sheet on each one of the pages, and then you've got what looks like a frame, but it's not a frame, because it's got, everything is consistent among the website. That's the modern way of doing it. This is the old-fashioned way of doing it, loading into a frame set. It does have some people still doing it though. Well, people are still putting icons out there with images. Actually, that's making a comeback. Actually, the images, really big images for navigation, huge. You know why? You load it on a web browser from a mobile phone, and you use your fingers to press the buttons. You need bigger buttons for fingers than you do for mouse clicks. Images are great for that. So you put images on everything for navigation. So even if it's not an image, it's an image. So even if it says, you know, home page, it's an image. It's not written in text, because then you can press the image and you put the image with a hyperlink, and then, you know, that's like a no-brainer navigation essentially. So that's a design consideration to think about. Let me just conclude on the menu frame concept. So to create a menu frame, needed to direct to the main page. This is probably what you're going to do for that first assignment. So the names of the frames are going to be in the frame set. Specify the frame name as the target. So one frame loads the other frame. This is what you're doing for assignment number 1. So specify the top as the target to return top lower to level to the browser. So over here we have a demo browser. In fact, these are two separate these are these are two separate examples. So we have the demo browser, then we have the menu of demos. This is what you're doing for assignment number 1. You're going to load your items, your history, your background, your family pictures, anything you want actually this way. Which is why it's kind of fun to get a website to do it with, I think. Here's page 1, 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, and this is going to be loading menu 19 and page 001 into certain frames. So you're going to have a main index page, and then you're going to have subframes that you're going to put in there. So web rules of thumb. So what I just kind of gave you was enough to get you to do the first assignment. Now you have to think about, well, how many colors am I going to put on there? How many fonts am I going to put on there? What tags am I going to apply towards each one of the sections? And no, you can't use a CSS for that first assignment. Don't use a CSS. You're doing things the old-fashioned way. So you have to provide a lot of neat features. Just because you can add a feature doesn't mean you should add a feature. So if anyone remembers MySpace, those were, in fact, actually some Facebook stuff is still kind of crowded. MySpace was the classic example of the don't ever do this on a website issues with color, background, flashing images, everything you could possibly imagine all on one page. And it looks ugly. It looks terrible, and it's hard to navigate, essentially. So use colors and fonts sparingly. This is your design advice. Although I'm not going to grade your first assignment on the quality of your design. But use it sparingly. No purple text on pink background. No weird fonts. Use images only where appropriate. Bright background images. I really love the black text on the dark colored background. Can't see anything. Or you can use reverse contrast. There's books on this stuff too, on good and bad website designs. You don't want to, in fact, you can make it so you can give your user a headache while looking at your page. So, and then there's people that go with color patterns. You know, oh, it looks like Apple. Oh, it looks like Windows. There's whole philosophies with that. Use images where appropriate that don't rely on windows or font sizes for layouts, which is kind of like why the frame sets don't necessarily work either. You're relying upon a window size for that frame to look good for the frame sets. If the window's too small, the frame set's not going to work so hot. If the window, they have it long and wide or something, those frames aren't going to look right. So don't be annoying. Oh, I really loved was the music. You know, you go to a website and all this music starts blasting. No, that's like, right now, it's like scam sites do that just to irritate you. Break large documents into smaller ones, provide a menu, internal frame menu. And stick to standard features for testing using IE and get rid of Netscape. We're talking about Firefox now. So that is our lecture for today. And it is the lecture that corresponds to assignment number 1. If you came in a little bit late, the materials are posted in the LMS and the assignment is available. Read through the assignment description. Everything you want to do, if you're not familiar with this stuff, you're brand new to the area, is an assignment, is in lecture number 4. So this was lecture number 4. And next week, we will be looking at more stuff. So for those people who are bored because they know all this stuff already, because some people, that's the interesting thing about the first couple weeks of this class, there's a little bit of overlap. People have played with this before, and then people have never seen it before because they come from health science or business. They don't never play with this stuff before. So we're slowly getting there to catch to an interesting point for those people who have the background already. But and those people who have the background already, you're going to have more fun with the first site because then you're going to put it up on some free website and put family pictures up there. And if you don't have a website, maybe you should consider getting a cheap account or something if you want to. Then you can start building your own, here's what I did at ITU kind of stuff or something like that. All right, see you next week. Don't leave. You have to sign the attendance. But we are done with the lecture part for today.